You know the old joke, don't you? One Sunday, the snow was bad. It piled up outside the church, and there was only one old farmer who made it into the church that Sunday morning. And the preacher said, "Well, it's just you and me, Farmer Joe. Should I go ahead and have the message?" He says, "Well, if only one cow shows up for the feeding, I go ahead and feed them." So he went ahead and had the message. It lasted half an hour. And after that, old Joe was shaking his hand back at the back door. He says, "When that one cow shows up for a feeding, I don't give him all I give to all the cows." But you're going to have everything I'm planned for all the cows anyway this morning. Does anybody else besides me, I wonder this sometimes, does anyone else besides me remember the Holloway all-day sucker? It was a big item in the candy stores when I was growing up. Later on, they came out with the Slowpoke, which was a slightly smaller version of the same thing. But the Holloway all-day sucker was this big old piece of this fossilized caramel on a stick. Long thing. And you'd shove one end of it in your mouth, and you could go a long time on that one sucker. In fact, you didn't dare chew down on it, because that caramel was so hard at the beginning there that you'd pull out every filling in your teeth, getting your teeth extracted from it. But you'd suck on that thing, and eventually, when it got soft in your mouth, you could pull it out. But it would last about an hour. It was about an hour's worth of eating of that caramel sucker there. They don't make anything like it today. I can remember that very fondly. We got candy very seldom when I was growing up. It was just an occasional thing. But I always liked having those because they lasted for so long. In fact, sometimes we didn't finish them all in one setting. We'd save the wrappers so that we could wrap it back up and get it back out later and go to town on that same sucker as well. Well, I think it's probably good that they didn't last any longer than what they did. They certainly didn't last all day, but a good hour worth of candy is probably more than we should have been eating anyway. If they had lasted any longer, I probably wouldn't have the good teeth I have today, because those things, they were definitely going to last a long time in your mouth. This morning, I'd like you to consider those things that last and those things that don't last. And so we come to our text for that this morning. We're going to have 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 16 through 18 for our text. "Therefore, we do not lose heart. But though our outer man is decaying, yet our inner man is being renewed day by day. For momentary light affliction is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison, while we look not at the things which are seen, but at the things which are not seen. For the things which are seen are temporal, but the things which are not seen are eternal." Now I want you to see in this passage, first of all, that Paul says our bodies are declining. The body is not meant to last, and our bodies, as we live in this world, are going to decline. Paul puts it this way: our outer man is decaying. Sometimes that word decaying sounds very appropriate to me. I can identify with that. I can identify with a body that's failing and not doing the things I want it to do. And so can some of you. Some of you know some of that limitation as well. People have noted that the older we get, the more our conversations revolve around what's going wrong with my body. We start talking about the illnesses and the injuries and the pains and the aches and the sufferings and the difficulties. That becomes the highlights of our conversations as we meet together. The truth is that though we might not notice it at a younger age, though we might not notice it while we're still in our youth, our whole life is about our physical plant declining. Once we're born, we're marching towards our expiration date. And the longer we live, the less our body renews itself, the more and more things wear out on us. So we may not see the tendency when we're still young. We may think our bodies are invincible. We may throw our bodies into full contact sports and fall down and laugh as we get up because we think that there's just nothing that can happen to our bodies. But those full contact sports and those falls come back to haunt you later. But regardless of whether or not we think our bodies are going to last forever, our physical plant is declining. Eventually, we're going to see how much that plant has declined. We are fearfully and wonderfully made. Our bodies are a wonderful gift from God. Do you know anything that man has created that can renew itself? Do you know anything that man's created that can replace its broken parts? You know, if we get a cut, if we suffer from something, if we even break a bone, our body begins the healing process on that. Isn't that an amazing thing, that our bodies can renew themselves? Certainly nothing that man has invented can do that for us. Yet nothing in this physical universe is made of eternal stuff. That which is physical cannot last. And our bodies, as fearfully and wonderfully made as they are not made for eternity. God never intended that we should last for eternity in this form. Nothing in all that we see, in all that we touch, in all that we experience in these physical forms is made for eternity. For those who are dedicating themselves to physical fitness in hope of warding off the decline, it's like trying to empty the ocean bucket by bucket. You aren't going to make much of a difference. You might add a year or two onto your life. You might add a little bit more flexibility and ability to get around, but in the end, our lives aren't that long. Compared to eternity, our lives are just for a moment. And regardless of what you do with your life, you're not going to be able to extend it very far. In fact, as we get older, that brevity of life also becomes more apparent to us. It's not just that we see the physical plant declining. We also see how very brief life is. Some people describe it as saying, as we get older, time goes faster. We know that's not true. Time's not going any faster, but sometimes it just seems to fly. Last month I was 8 years old. Last week I was 25. Yesterday I was in my 40s, and tomorrow my life on this earth will be over. That's what it seems like. Life is racing by. How did I ever get to be 60 years old? I can't figure that one out. And yet here I am, and the majority of my life on this earth is over with. The world around us is ever changing. Nothing stays as it is. No matter how much we might want to freeze a moment in time, no matter how much we might want to hold on to an ideal day, time is about things moving, and you can't stop it. Businesses are established, and eventually they're going to shut their doors. New homes eventually see abandonment and decay, or they're demolished to make way for the next generation's new homes. Nations rise and fall. Friends and loved ones are enjoyed for a brief time, and then we come to say our sad goodbyes to them as they no longer continue in our lives. We can't hold on to time. It sinks through our hands and leaves us only glimpses behind of what we can remember of the past that we experienced. 1 Peter chapter 1 verse 24 puts it this way: "For all flesh is like grass, and all its glory like the flower of grass. The grass withers and the flower falls off." That's life. Here today, gone tomorrow. And it doesn't do us any good to rail at God and blame Him with our physical decay and our losses. This physical world, once again, was never meant to last forever. That was not God's plan in this physical creation. We weren't meant to be a physical creation forever. And it would do us well not to expect more of the physical than it is capable of. Nothing in this physical world lasts. And if your hopes are in this physical life only, if you're dreaming only about what you can accomplish in the here and now, about what you can achieve in this life, how sad. You are chained to death, and death is just around the corner. But our passage doesn't leave it there at that very depressing note, does it? Everything's declining, everything's failing, death is just around the corner. No, Paul talks about physical death is in contrast to what he says next. The inner person, he tells us, is improving. The wonderful thing about the passing of time in this world is what it does for those who are in Christ Jesus. You know, for all the decline we see on the outward person, for the person that's in Christ Jesus, the passing of time means growth. It means maturity. It means we're constantly being refreshed and renewed inside. So for all that decay and that decline on the outside, on the inside, we're becoming more and better all the time. The longer we journey with the Lord, the better our spiritual condition. The eyes don't focus on the small print that our Bibles are written with anymore, like they once did. Our ears might be struggling to make out the words when we come together for a Bible study or when we come together for a sermon. Our legs, our hands, our backs make it difficult some days to get started and make it harder on a Sunday morning to get up and get dressed in time to make it over for the church assembly. It's a real struggle some days. But on the inside, we are running and leaping as our walk with Him takes on new depth and joy. And those who are focusing on their spiritual lives find their later years of our journey truly to be the golden years, even with all the physical pain, even with all the infirmities that visit our later years. That long walk with that Lord, that deepening maturity in our walk with the Lord, makes these the most blessed years of our existence here on this earth. I wouldn't want to go back to my 20s, even though my body cooperated a whole lot better with me back then. I wouldn't want to go back then because I can remember what my walk was like with the Lord back then. And compared to what I know in my relationship with the Lord now, compared to the depths that I'm able to have in my relationship with God, I was awfully shallow back then. I didn't realize it at the time. I came here when I was 29 years old. I was awful shallow. I came here to this church. Now I'm 60. And I want to tell you that my body may have declined, but I wouldn't trade those years for anything because of that growing depth with God. And in fact, the experience of our physical limitations and failures should make us more aware of our dependency upon the Lord. The more our body fails, the more we realize that we're not a force unto ourselves. You know, I think sometimes young people think that they're supermen, that they can do anything. We hear that chanted through our society so much. I was talking to the kids downstairs this morning. You know, there's this one home improvement show I like on DIY, but the young woman who restores these houses, she's always saying, if you believe you can do it, you can do anything. No, you can't. You can believe you can fly and jump off a cliff. You aren't going to fly, no matter how sincerely you might believe it. You can believe that tomorrow they're going to crown you king of the United States of America. They're not going to do it. People believe in all sorts of delusional things, and it doesn't come to be. We cannot do anything we believe. And that power of positive thinking is nonsense. Yes, you get farther with confidence than you do if you never try anything. But our success is not developed on the basis of our being able to accomplish. It's God being able to accomplish through us. I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength. It's His ability in me. I become less, He becomes greater. That's what Paul says here. The more we have frailties, the more we can see the hand of God in our lives. And isn't that an exciting thing, to be able to see God working in your life? 2 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 9 and 10. And He has said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, For power is perfected in weakness. Most gladly, therefore, I will rather boast about my weaknesses, so that the power of Christ may dwell in me. Therefore, I am well content with weaknesses, with insults, with distresses, with persecutions, with difficulties, for Christ's sake. For when I am weak, then I am strong. That's the wonderful message of our text today. We might be getting weaker and weaker on the outside, but when I'm weak, then I'm strong because he's strong in me. And we can see the joy of being strengthened on the inside, even as we see that our bodies aren't going to be able to last in this world. That brings me down to the last point that I'd like to share with you this morning, and that's about keeping our perspective. In the 16th centuries, artists developed a new form of art. Perhaps they were bored with painting on flat surfaces. I'm not sure what inspired this movement, but somebody came up with an art form that we call anamorphic. Are you familiar with anamorphic art? If you look at an anamorphic painting, or if you look at an anamorphic drawing, it looks distorted. It looks like the person on it must have been on drugs when he did this, because nothing is the right shape, nothing is the right proportion. Everything looks out of some madman's dream. But if you take a reflective cylinder and you place it in the right spot next to that painting or next to that drawing, and you look in the reflected surface of that painting, everything is perfectly proportional. You're able to see a beautiful artwork reflected on that cylinder, and you realize it's all a matter of perspective. Yeah, looking at the thing in the first place, you thought a lunatic did it, but when the right piece was in place, everything made sense. It's all a matter of perspective. And what we will believe is influenced by what we can see. Our perspective is affected by what we can see. Now, Missouri is called the show me state. The idea is that they won't accept what they are merely told. They want to see the proof. Until they can see it with their own eyes, they're not going to believe what you're saying to them. I believe that's a remnant of Missouri's atheist background. You need to understand that Missouri was heavily influenced by the French Revolution. The revolution in France was a response to the people that had wealth and power abusing that wealth and power. They came into a monetary decline in the country of France, and the people who were wealthy, the people who were privileged, the people who were in power decided they weren't going to suffer. They were just going to raise higher taxes on the people that were in the lower levels. And pretty soon the people on the streets were starving, as these people in the palaces were living among all this gold gilt and all the beautiful carvings and all the intricacies of the French in that time. We have people living in opulence, and it's dependent on people who are starving to death. And the people of France rose up against the royals, against the wealthy, against the influential, and the blood of the guillotine ran red with those people who had oppressed them. In that same period of time, the people of France had become disillusioned with God, because the Catholic Church in France had sided with the rich and the powerful. Their bishops were as bad as the kings in celebrating excesses while the people were starving. And so when France threw off their government, they threw off also the Catholic Church. They had a revolution based upon atheism. Now, this revolution took place just a few years after our American Revolution, and they were deeply enamored by what we were doing here in the United States as a land of the free, as a home of liberty. We had thrown off our oppressors, and we had started this brave new world here. But the one thing they didn't like was that their revolution was based on atheism, while our revolution was based on a strong belief in God. Our founding documents talk about God-given human rights. And it was us establishing a Christian nation in the world that France didn't care much for. So they decided they needed to change us. And they knew they weren't going to change us on the eastern seaboard, where the church was already heavily established, and minister training institutions of higher learning like Harvard were being set up. They knew that they weren't going to be able to make much impact there. But they knew that we were a huge nation with vast land holdings to the west, and that there would be a migration. So they decided to cut off belief at the Mississippi River. They used that as their line of demarcation. They decided that anybody across the Mississippi River was going to be atheist. And they set up their little French communities on the other side of the river with names like liberty and freedom, and their hopes to deliver us from our belief in God. Missouri, as the show-me state, is showing some of that atheist connection. You see, faith in God requires that we don't believe in merely what we can see, that we trust in what God has revealed to us. In fact, we have to refuse to walk merely according to our own experience, according to our own knowledge, and bow to His superior wisdom. This idea that it's not truth unless I've experienced it myself is a very atheist thought. But you know something? We have a lot in common with Missouri when it comes to wanting to have things confirmed by our own experience, wanting to believe in what we can see for ourselves. We have a lot of that show me in us. Now, the Christian faith is based on the acceptance, as I said before, of what God has revealed to us above what is apparent to us. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 18. So we fix our eyes not on what is seen, but what is unseen. Since that what is seen is temporary, but what is unseen is eternal. Hebrews chapter 11, verse 1. Now faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. And 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 7, for we walk by faith, not by sight. Yet we see ourselves struggling with that same skepticism that says, show me. We often relate better to what we can see than to what we've been told. And if we're not careful, we come to regard this present world, the real world that we can touch and see, as the real world. And the spiritual realm, unseen and untouched, we come to regard as the less real world. Now, if that's our perspective, if we're more convinced by what we can see and experience in this present world than what God offers us in the world to come, which world are we going to be living for? If we're more convinced in the solidity of this present world than we are of the spiritual kingdom, we're going to find ourselves living for this present world. Nathan, I got a problem here, buddy. Thank you. And so people are often consumed with their physical state, and they're neglectful of their spiritual state. Because this seems like the real world to them, they're applying all their energies to their physical life and very little to their spiritual life. But as Paul informs us, the spiritual realm is the real world because it's eternal, it's lasting. And the physical world is insubstantial because it's composed entirely of those things which cannot last. This is not the real world. This is the temporary world around us. The real world, the world that we need to be living for, is the spiritual world. And thus, Paul is able to talk about physical decline and pain as momentary light affliction. Because what does it matter what happens to our bodies when we have the eternal riches of a deep spiritual relationship with God? When we have those things that cannot be taken away from us, that are trusted to His keeping. What happens to us here and now in these forms doesn't mean anything in comparison to the riches that He has given us. In conclusion this morning, I don't want to make the false promises to you that many religious commentators have made about all the riches and physical blessings you'll have if you follow the Lord. You've heard them say those things before. Oh, if you do this and pray, then you're going to get tenfold blessings in the future. There's, as I said before, that one preacher that preached that series of sermons through the 20s, very popular, Acres of Diamonds, talking about how if we were faithful to God, we were just going to get rich in this world. And the real believers are those people that God was filling with their bank accounts with wealth. No, I'm not going to make those promises to you this morning. Those things are superficial. Those things are not important. They don't matter a bit in the scope of eternity. I would only point to you to the rich spiritual blessings of an eternity with true riches that last. So this morning, that's what our invitation time is about. Get your eyes off the physical and turn them on to the joys of a full relationship with Christ, and nothing will bless your life. It doesn't matter if your body falls apart. Nothing will bless your life like having a full walk with the Lord. So this morning, if you'd like to renew your commitment to Him or make a commitment for the first time, we want you to have an opportunity, and we invite you to come forward as we stand and sing our invitation song.